Mr. Richmond McKinney, Ambassador for the Rastafarian Community, Mr. Lewis Sweeting, and the High Priest Tafari Thompson. Welcome, gentlemen. Is there a seconder? The chair recognizes the honorable member for Centreville.
Rise every morning with health, strength, and purpose. This beautiful collective of islands called the Bahamas is a privilege we all share. I'm grateful to God for this privilege. And I also remain grateful to the people of the Centreville constituency for their confidence and continued support. Thank you. As I endeavor to represent them to the best of my ability. Mr. Deputy, Team Centreville and I are continuing to work for our people in the constituency day and night. Just this past Saturday, we had our All Things Bahamian fish fry. I participated in frying some snappers in Bahamas. We had potato bread, cassava bread, some benny cake, and some peanut cake. All things Bahamian, you name it, we had it. And who then leave with a belly full, left with a plate full? No. We call them helpful carriers. But on a different note, Mr. Deputy, I'd also like to take this opportunity to extend some heartfelt condolences to all of those that would have lost loved ones in our constituency. This Saturday, we funeralized Mr. Yuri Maycock from DeVoe Street. I think we would all remember Mr. Maycock as we celebrated with him in the opening, the ribbon cutting of his newly refurbished home on DeVoe Street just a few months ago. Along with Mr. DeVoe, Mr. Maycock, Mr. Deputy, we also lost Ms. Dorothea Davis, who was a constituent of Centreville and is highlighted as the first female inspector on the Royal Bahamas Police Force. We have a lot of unsung heroes in our midst and within the walls of our constituency, Mr. Deputy. And I would also like to take this opportunity to extend heartfelt condolences to Mother Nikki from Milton Street, who just this weekend lost her son. Mr. Deputy, as a country, we recently celebrated the 51st anniversary of our independence. And I wish to extend a happy belated independence to every Bahamian across the length and breadth of this country and around the world. I also want every Bahamian to know that all is not lost. We are still in pursuit of the dreams that our forefathers and mothers had for this country when they marched, protested, advocated, and sacrificed for the freedoms that we now enjoy. I believe that it is our task to maintain and expand on the accomplishments that serve as our strong foundation for the next generation. That is how important these positions are that we hold in this place and in government. Mr. Deputy, the Progressive Liberal Party is known for and has been affiliated with positive change on behalf of the Bahamian people since its inception. And in my last presentation in this place, I quoted the words of the Right Honorable Silindin Pinling when he said that this party was born out of the absolute necessity felt by the masses in the country to bring about a change. This party was weaned on the hopes and aspirations of the people being symbolized by the party. This party attained its maturity on the solid achievements it made for and on behalf of the people. As is our custom, this PLP administration, Kalani, has been addressing the hard issues head on, addressing the headwinds head on, and continue to bring legislation to this place that will advance our country and our people. Now, there are a lot of things that people say about us as a government. And though we fully admit that there's more to be done, it cannot be credibly said that this administration has done nothing for the country since assuming office. That is simply not true. Mr. Deputy, today is one of those days that will be marked in our nation's history as we discuss a topic that some may consider controversial. We are discussing the use, cultivation, transportation, and distribution of cannabis in our society for medicinal purposes. For time immemorial, cannabis, as it is widely known, has been considered for its negative uses. However, as with every other thing in existence, there's another side to the story. Marijuana can also be used to positively impact the lives of those who are suffering from various illnesses and diseases. All of us in this place should recall Mr. Fenton Nemo, who served as a member right here. He unfortunately passed in 2018. On July of that same year, he was quoted in one of the local morning dailies speaking about the positive impact of medical marijuana on his life. Mr. Nemo claimed that it saved his life when he was battling cancer. He said, and I quote, "I had no appetite. I couldn't eat, nausea, felt bad all the time. But once I take the pill, the only thing I did was fall asleep. The pill takes out that element that causes you to get high." Most government officials have not done their research. I reference Mr. Nemo's comments to give those who may have no experience to draw from a glimpse at the real-world issues that Bahamians with legitimate, chronic, painful, and in some cases terminal issues are facing on a daily basis. We all either knew or knew of Fenton Nemo, who was at one time the Minister of State for Environment. Understanding and bringing into perspective the relief that can be brought to Bahamians with the enacting of this legislation is of the utmost importance. Mr. Deputy, Mr. Nemo told the paper that he was diagnosed with cancer in 2014, and he had used the drug Marinol, which is a man-made form of cannabis, to restore his appetite, combat nausea, and relieve pain. Mr. Nemo said that he had to travel to Miami each time he needed relief. He further informed that when doctors had given up in the States, they actually gave me a prescription for it, but it's illegal in the Bahamas. It comes in a pill form and looks just like a chocolate. But I had to travel to Miami. If I felt really bad, I had to go to Miami just to purchase and use it there. Mr. Deputy, the story of Fenton Nemo is the story of many Bahamians battling with excruciating pain associated with diseases like cancer. While he had the wherewithal to improve his quality of life before his passing, many more Bahamians do not. They simply can't afford it. Mr. Deputy, another real-world example is that of Bishop Simeon Hall, a prominent retired pastor in our community who was being vocal about his thoughts on medical marijuana. Bishop Hall served as co-chair of the Bahamas National Commission on Marijuana along with Quinn McCartney, and he has advocated that Bahamians educate themselves on the use of cannabis as a medical remedy and treatment. It was recently reported that he requires dialysis several times weekly, and that he and his physicians are looking into whether cannabis can provide relief. Mr. Deputy, to solve these type of issues, I believe is one of the most important functions of our jobs here as parliamentarians. We are here to responsibly address what affects the Bahamian people. I think it can be reasonably said that we all understand the state of the health of Bahamians, especially those suffering from non-communicable diseases like heart disease, stroke, cancer, Alzheimer's, etc. Many, if not all of us, know someone who is battling one or more of these ailments. It is our duty to ensure that all that can be done in our country is done to finally bring relief to Bahamians that fall into these categories. Mr. Deputy, in January of 2019, the World Health Organization recommended to the United Nations that it update the scope of controls of cannabis and cannabis-related substances because of what at the time was the emergent therapeutic role of cannabis-based medicines. These recommendations were made after a review was carried out by the Expert Committee on Drug Dependence, which is an independent advisory body of WHO. In December of 2020, the 53 member states of the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs voted to remove cannabis from Schedule 4 of the 1961 Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. In this schedule, cannabis was listed as a dangerous drug alongside substances like heroin and desomorphine and acetylphenone, etc. Mr. Deputy, as of this date, extensive research has also been conducted by the CARICOM Regional Commission on Marijuana. In its final report entitled, Waiting to Exhale, Safeguarding Our Future Through Reasonable Socio-Legal Policy on Marijuana, released in 2018, the Commission stated, the Commission acknowledges that there are documented health risks associated with cannabis. However, modern scientific data demonstrates that there is conclusive evidence that cannabis has considerable value as a medicinal substance, and as liberalization in the law occurs, scientific studies are proving more medicinal uses for the plant. The report also stated the now undisputable proof of the medical benefits and the value of cannabis as a medicinal substance challenges its classification as a dangerous drug without value, both domestically and internationally. This fact alone is sufficient to dismantle its current legal classification. Mr. Deputy, the Bahamas National Commission on Marijuana also released a preliminary report which was tabled in this place. Among its many recommendations, the Commission suggested that the necessary amendments be made to the Dangerous Drug Act that will facilitate the legalization and regulation of cannabis for medicinal purposes, and to provide for the proper regulation as relates to cultivation, processing, and distribution of cannabis and cannabis-based products for persons prescribed to use it for medical purposes. The Commission also recommended that the necessary amendments be made to the Dangerous Drug Act that will facilitate and regulate the legalization of cannabis for medical and scientific research, thus bringing our country a step closer to compliance with the relevant international conventions, and that provisions be made for tourists who are prescribed cannabis for medical use in their own countries to obtain cannabis for medical use in the Bahamas. This can be facilitated by a visitor's medical cannabis card issued by the appropriate authority. Mr. Deputy, the extensive research conducted both internationally and domestically is what has brought us to where we are today, debating the cannabis bill in this place. Section 4 of the bill sets out its objectives, which reads as follows. Excuse me. The object of this act is to, A, authorize the production of cannabis, B, provide for the handling of cannabis for medical, scientific research, and religious purposes. C, provide for the possession and use of cannabis for medical purposes and for use in religious worship. D, impose quality assurance measures for safety, efficacy, and effectiveness. Provide for robust monitoring of cannabis throughout all phases, from cultivation to disposal. F, deter and reduce activities in relation to unlawfully obtained cannabis through appropriate enforcement measures and sanctions, and to protect the health of the public by controlling access to cannabis, and enhance public awareness on the health risks associated with cannabis use. Mr. Deputy, this administration has sought to ensure the proper management of the industry that will be created with the enactment of this legislation. It is envisioned that the cannabis industry in the Bahamas will be overseen by the Bahamas Cannabis Authority, a corporate sole body. The mandated functions of the authority are set out in Section 6, subsection 2 of the bill. I will highlight some of those sections. Section 6, subsection 2C speaks to issuing licenses for the handling of cannabis in accordance with the provisions of this act. D, to keep and maintain a public register of licenses issued under this act, which shall include, 1, the name of the licensee, the type of license issued, the registered office of the licensee, and to develop enforcement procedures to ensure compliance with the provisions of this act, to establish and maintain a confidential database, electronically or otherwise, to include information relating to patients, medical practitioners, prescribing cannabis, licensees, and caregivers. Also, to register the amount of cannabis handled by licensees in accordance with this act. Additionally, to enable compliance with the requirements to this act and to prevent the abuse of cannabis. Also, to provide for the electronic tracking of the handling of cannabis and to prohibit the promotion of cannabis, which is non-informational. And also, lastly, but not leastly, Mr. Deputy, to provide for the distribution of educational materials and the conduct of training programs in relation to the cannabis industry and the development and the use of cannabis. Mr. Deputy, the highlighted functions of the authority are intended to keep a tight rein on the industry and provide the necessary education and training for persons within the cannabis industry and the general public. I think that during the process of this and other bills coming to this place and public discourse on the subject, it is understood that there is a need for extensive public awareness and specialty training. We must ensure that accurate and up-to-date information is circulated within the public domain, not social media happenstance, Mr. Deputy. And this will be especially necessary for licensees and medical professionals to ensure that they properly grow, transport, and distribute cannabis, just as the member for Tall Pines indicated earlier in his presentation. It is also imperative that the general public understands the proper uses for cannabis, its adverse effects with improper usage, and what this legislation permits and prohibits. To this end, the government, through the functions of the authority, will carry out a widespread education and training program. Mr. Deputy, this authority is also mandated in Section 6, subsection 3, to develop quality, safety, proficiency in testing, training, and certification standards and specifications for observance by licensees or other persons involved in the cannabis industry in consultation with the Director of the Bureau of Standards. This legislation also directs the authority to develop guidance on the benefits and risks of cannabis, the use of cannabis in respect of the prescribed medical conditions, and possible contradictions, distinguish between the therapeutic potency of cannabis when ingested as opposed to smoking, and facilitating research for medical or scientific purposes in consultation with the medical and pharmacy councils. The authority must also develop guidance specific to the Rastafarian faith for the handling and safe use of cannabis as a sacrament. Mr. Deputy, understanding that the possibility of abuse of cannabis exists, and that as a responsible government of a developing nation, we must ensure that should our citizens go down the wrong path, as may happen from time to time, there is opportunity, programs, initiatives, and policies in place to help get them back on the right track. To ensure that this occurs, Section 12 vests in the Minister of Finance the power to divert funds received through the licensing process towards strengthening the capacity and programs of the Bahamas National Drug Council, strengthening mental health institutions and services, funding scientific or medical research into cannabis, and funding research into the cultivation of cannabis and the manufacturing of cannabis products with nutraceutical values. Mr. Deputy, in contradiction of what has been said by some, the enactment of this legislation will not lead to a free-for-all as it pertains to the use and distribution of cannabis in the Bahamas. As a country, we are establishing an industry that will expand entrepreneurial opportunities for our people and create jobs. As such, in Part 3, Section 8, subsections 1 through 4, it sets forth the criteria necessary for persons applying for licenses under this Act. They must be at least 25 years old and have not been convicted of any offense under the Dangerous Drug Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Criminal Justice Act, the International Cooperation Act. This section also ensures the beneficial and meaningful participation of Bahamians in this cannabis industry. Section 18, subsection 3, indicates that an entity applying for a license to cultivate, sell, transport, deliver, and distribute cannabis must be 100% owned by one or more Bahamian citizens. I know that was mentioned earlier by the member for Tall Pines, but it's important for us to pound that fact home, Mr. Deputy. Similarly, in Section 18, subsection 4, any entity seeking a license to conduct analytical testing or scientific research relating to the development of cannabis or manufacture or packaging of cannabis and accessories must be at least 30% beneficially owned by a Bahamian citizen. Mr. Deputy, the beneficial participations of Bahamian in this industry is so important that this legislation prohibits a licensee to sell or otherwise transfer any beneficial interest without the permission of the authority. It also prohibits any change in senior management without the authority being satisfied that the proposed new management is fit and proper for the position. This bill also authorizes the Bahamas Cannabis Authority to conduct inspections of the premises of licensees. Part 4, sections 28 to 35 covers the powers of inspectors to enter premises, to request documents, information and samples, to examine receptacles and packages found on the premises, and to take photographs and recordings, etc. The inspector can also seize products if necessary. Meticulous documentation of any seized product is required from the inspector to be sent to the minister responsible within 7 days after seizure. This bill, Mr. Deputy, makes the obstruction of an inspector an offense. Section 33 states that a person who obstructs an inspector in the performance of his functions under this act and fails to A, produce any records reasonably required, or B, production of a search warrant in accordance with Section 30 to allow the inspector to enter the premises for inspection, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine not exceeding $20,000 or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 3 years, or both. Mr. Deputy, the preliminary report of the Bahamas National Commission on Marijuana, referenced earlier in this presentation, spoke specifically to the use of cannabis as a sacrament in the Rastafari faith in the Bahamas. The report states there is high admiration for the cannabis tree in the Rastafarian movement, and its first and main use is as a spiritual sacrament. They use the holy herb not only for sacramental purposes, but also for food and medicinal purposes. The holy herb is used in many food dishes and drinks in the Rastafari way of life. Section 49, subsections 1 through 7 of this bill outlines the use of cannabis for religious purposes, referring specifically to those of the Rastafarian faith. Mr. Deputy, at this juncture, I think it must be said that this legislation does not give carte blanche now to anyone to distribute cannabis indiscriminately. Section 49, subsections 1 through 7 state that an organization of the Rastafarian faith or person who is responsible for the administration or management of a place of worship of such faith may apply to the authority for a religious organization license to distribute cannabis to members for use as a sacrament in an assembly or in association with other such Rastafarians in a place of worship in accordance with this act. Secondly, a person of such faith who is not affiliated with an organization of the faith or a place of worship may apply to the authority for a religious use license to possess and consume for use as a religious sacrament in a secured area in a private residence. Thirdly, the holder of a religious organization license shall only distribute cannabis to members, A, who are 18 years of age or older, B, for use solely as a sacrament at a religious service, and the holder of a religious use license shall not distribute cannabis to another person outside of said parameters. Fifth, a holder of a religious organization license may make an application to the authority for an exemption event permit in the form prescribed by regulations to observe an occasion of worship or fellowship at a public place. So there's the opportunity to apply for an exemption under that particular criteria. And six, where cannabis is used as a sacrament at religious services under the authorization of this section, no person shall be liable to arrest, detention, prosecution for any offense as regard cannabis being conveyed to, possessed, or used at the service in such amount and under such conditions as may be specified in regulations. Mr. Deputy, it was the late Maya Angelou who said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." This legislation decriminalizes the possession of small amounts of cannabis. It does not wholly legalize the possession, transport, import, or distribution by any person or entity not licensed by the authority within the parameters of this legislation. Per the bill, in Section 55, subsection 2, no person is allowed to possess cannabis, and the total amount of which is determined to be the equivalent of more than 30 grams. A person who possesses cannabis in contravention to Section 55, subsection 1, is liable on conviction in the case of an individual 18 years or older to a fine not exceeding $2,500, and B, in the case of an organization, to a fine not exceeding $25,000. Mr. Deputy, understanding the impact to date that our laws have had on predominantly young men in our country who have been jailed and have criminal records for the possession of small amounts of cannabis, provision has been made in the rehabilitation of offenders, expunging of records, Indian hemp offenses. Order 2024 for the expunging of criminal records for individuals convicted of possessing 30 grams or less of Indian hemp, now termed cannabis, under the Dangerous Drug. Mr. Deputy, if I may indulge for 2 minutes, wrapping up right now. And eligible individuals can apply to be treated as rehabilitated persons and have their convictions expunged after 6 months from the conviction date. Mr. Deputy, as the member for Centreville, it is heartening to know that many men in our country now have the opportunity to have their records expunged. Yes. If the opportunity is positively used, these men will be able to get good jobs and maybe even travel, a dream that some of them have not been able to reach. Mr. Deputy, it is important to note that possession with the intent to supply continues to be an offense with the enactment of this new legislation. And Section 56, subsection 2, sets out the parameters of such conviction. Mr. Deputy, the men and women in law enforcement in the Bahamas will play an integral role in ensuring the orderly rollout and application of the clauses within this legislation. It will be imperative that officers are familiar with what is permissible and what is prohibited. Section 65, subsection 2, sets out all of the said parameters for them to apply. And additionally, the fourth schedule sets out the fixed penalty notices and parameters relating to the same. Mr. Deputy, the government has continuously and consistently put in place numerous regulations that will protect the public and ensure that the cannabis industry benefits Bahamians and not harm them. Meanwhile, the government is also able to offer opportunities to those wishing to farm cannabis, as indicated earlier by the member for Marco City, who once sat where I now sit in the Ministry of Agriculture and Marine Resources. The Department of Agriculture, who has had a presence in consultation meetings, will register and inspect cannabis farms and nurseries. And I have no doubt that the department, along with BASFA, the Bahamas Agricultural Health and Food Safety Authority, will rigorously monitor cannabis farms to ensure that they are held to the highest standards, no pun intended. Mr. Deputy, the highest standards. Mr. Deputy, I have sought to highlight as many of the sections of the bill as time would permit. Highlight. While my presentation, not literally, member for while my presentation is certainly no substitute for reading and understanding the contents of this proposed legislation, it is a start and hopefully a catalyst for Bahamians to read the cannabis bill and its accompanying documents. Change is on the way, and it will alter our current modus operandi as it pertains to the handling of cannabis in law and in practice, and citizens should be well informed on what is about to occur. Mr. Deputy, I understand that there is some trepidation surrounding this legislation among citizens, and it is understandable, as we have for decades associated cannabis with illegal activity and not so much with medical treatment. However, we have seen through the reference research and through the implementation of similar legislation in other countries like Canada, Australia, Germany, Uruguay, Jamaica, Chile, Czech Republic, Netherlands, Brazil, Israel, Spain, France, Italy, and others, that with education data-driven decision-making and strict and proper enforcement, the cannabis industry can have positive economic and health benefits. Mr. Deputy, as legislators and policymakers, we must pay attention as science and technology advances on issues once thought to be controversial and taboo, while simultaneously holding fast to the principles on which our nation was founded and protecting our people. We do not have the luxury of shying away from the hard subjects and conversations. There are many other laws that are in need of modernizing, replacing, or repealing, and we must be about the business, that business, because it is in the interest of national development. Mr. Deputy, the enactment of this proposed legislation will usher in a new day in the Bahamas, and though other administrations have conducted research and analysis in the past on marijuana, it is this Davis-led administration that had brought this legislation to Parliament.
Honourable Member, Honourable Member, you're going to wrap up because
Yes,
we have a lot of
wrapping
speakers
right now,
coming
Mr.
up.
Deputy. And
The chair recognizes the Honourable Member for Marco City.
I thought prior you and the member for Tall Pines acknowledged that work was in fact done by a commission and administration. So the last statement, I'm just let me finish. The last statement just seemed to be out of context with the work that had been done. But while you're on your feet, could you clarify whether or not persons whose records are expunged, as we fully support, whether they are eligible to apply for licenses, because it would be unfair for them to have their records expunged, to have been dealt with harshly by the system, and now that the opportunity is available, everybody else has a chance at the license other than them.
I'm informed, Marco City, that the member for Tall Pines will address that in his wrap-up. That the last that I'm informed.
Affect our debate, so we
Yes.
just wanted to get a sense on whether or not.
Yes. And additionally, we do recognize the efforts made, and I did indicate that. I did indicate that although that their previous administrations did indeed conduct research. So that is in fact acknowledged. But what I am saying, Marco City, is that it is this Davis-led administration that is now bringing it to Parliament, and will ensure that this industry gets up and running. We're going to ensure that, Marco City. Be patient. I know you're looking forward to this. It's coming. It is this Davis-led, yes, sir, indeed. It is this Davis-led administration, Marco City, that is changing the status quo. It is this Davis-led administration that is ensuring that Bahamians are gainfully employed, properly educated, and trained, and have opportunities for upward mobility. I ask that colleagues support this bill as we continue to bring positive, progressive change to the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Mr. Deputy, Centreville seconds and supports this bill. I thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be read a second time and committed. A bill for an act to regulate the handling of cannabis and the establishment of the Cannabis Authority. As many